morning, everybody, and welcome to you out there in the world. I hope you're enjoying everything. We certainly do here, live from the GCCM in Miami. So again, welcome and welcome to the people here in the audience and to my fellow panelists. And I'll give them a quick minute to introduce themselves and see who you are talking to, actually, and they are talking to. So please, Sophie, over to you.
Sophie and Therese, I'm the executive chairman of 265. We are a 30-year-old consulting firm with a network of global agencies. We specialize in technology, not just telecom, and we help companies kind of with their go-to-market plan, growth spurs, big outcome, M&A integration, IPOs, and so forth. We had the pleasure to work with Equinix for 6 years, so it's great to be with Jim, and we have the pleasure to work with Mox right now. So very good.
Okay, good having you here. So Justin, over to you, please.
Thank you. Justin Melnikoff, the president and COO of Mox Networks. We've been a long-haul telecommunications layer 1 and dark fiber provider in the United States, Canada, and Japan for 9 years now. And I've had a great time doing it and building our network out piece by piece and growing our team exponentially.
Well, thank you for being here. Jim, over to you.
Hey, everybody. Jim Poole. I'm a vice president for global business development at Equinix. So if you're not familiar, Equinix is the world's largest digital infrastructure company, which essentially means we run 230 some odd data centers across 63 metros in 27 different countries now around the world. So nice to meet everybody.
And counting, I guess, right?
And counting, yes. Just recently went up as of yesterday.
I know. So thank you very much, Jim, for joining us virtually. And last but not least, Ramiro, please.
Yes, Ramiro Nobre. I'm Vice President of Global Strategy and Solutions Engineering at Accedian. We provide visibility, quality of service, and cybersecurity resources to operators, infrastructure providers all over the world. I've been there for 9 years and have watched us go from pure hardware to evolving as the networks have evolved into software. And it's really, really cool to be part of that evolution.
Thank you very much, and welcome to be here. And thank you very much, Accedian, for sponsoring this panel session. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about the wholesale industry in a data-hungry age. So all the challenges and opportunities which, accompanies that, actually. So Ramiro, if I can may ask you to kick off with your keynote presentation. What are you going to talk about?
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to talk about data indigestion. Okay.
Okay. So here we go.
So
right.
Really, I want to talk a bit about the quality versus the quantity, right? When we talk about data hungry, we talk about everything we're doing. Whether it's in marketing, in commercials, in our own conversations, we tend to focus on speed and throughput. How fast, how much more, how fast can I download something? And we tend to leave out a few things. And that's why I said preventing data indigestion, right? Because we tend to be a little sloppy with our consumption sometimes, like we might be with a big meal. So if you can go ahead, please. So one of the things I wanted to sort of level set us here a little bit. When we talk about data consumption, right? We look at growth from the early 2000s, mid 2000s, projecting out to 2025. There's been a massive increase, and this is both fixed and mobile, right? We can see that there's been a 30% increase just in 1 year from 20 to 2021, and 60% of that is pandemic related, which makes me think that the 27% from 2020 to 2025 is actually understated. I think we haven't quite seen where the work from home because you had to now work from home because you want to is really going to take us. And it's something that makes what we do even more and more challenging. And when we look at ourselves as consumers of this, okay, whether it's as an individual user, whether that's as a operator buying from a wholesaler, whether as a wholesaler buying from a dark fiber provider, whether we're using our network, other networks, combined networks, we have certain expectations. First off, it's there because no longer do we have the luxury of having a nice to have of data services. It's a need. It was really interesting listening to about how the Telecom Without Borders, Sin Fronteras, I believe is how you pronounce it, pretty close. Okay. They are going in and setting up communication services after an event, whether it's a natural occurrence or not, because it's essential, because it becomes life-saving. So no longer is this a convenience. It is an absolute need. And what we all expect is that the infrastructure providing it, just like the roads we drive on every day, is there, is working flawlessly, faultlessly, and is invisible to us. We don't care. We just want it to work and expect it to work. So then we look at next generation services, because at the end of the day, all these networks that we're building are about providing next generation services. And what are the promises, whether it's 5G, whether it's multi-gig services into a business or into a home? It's latency, right? I want to be able to not only do things faster because I'm a gamer and I want to have that edge over the other guy, but actually I'm a surgeon. I'm the only one in the world that can perform this life-saving operation, but I'm 4,000 miles away from the patient. And how can I actually save that patient's life from where I am? Well, you're not going to be able to do that without enabling technologies that let you be able to have that precise control you need in doing so. Efficiency. As operators building networks, we expect to get more for less. So the efficiency has to be there, whether in spectrum and doing it wirelessly or whether in network efficiency by being able to get, like we heard in a panel yesterday, more for your dollar, right? Driving it down. There is not going to be anything more dense than tomorrow, because every day we will continue to put in more radiating points, we'll continue to have more congestion points, et cetera, in the network, but we expect it to work. So one of the promises of the next generation is everything works well together, right? And the capacity we're going to have to do in our networks is unsurmounted. We haven't scratched it. And of course, the throughput, right? We expect to get more, right? I really care about the fact that I can download a video in 3 seconds because I forgot to do it before the airplane door closed. But that's not the reason why we need that. We need it because in order to enable the automation in factories, in order to enable the self-driving vehicles, et cetera, we have to be able to deliver the speed that's needed for it to work. Our networks have evolved from it's good enough, it'll work, the customer will be upset, but I just have to be better than my competitor, to the network won't work. If we can't operate at machine speed, our networks just won't work. So the common theme in all of this is performance, right? Everything that we do has to perform, whether it is the initial setup of a card in order to connect the fiber to transport light from A to B, or whether it's an application that's riding at that endpoint of that network from an edge compute source to a consumer's device X, or to 1,000 IoT devices. And the reality is, you just can't control what you can't see, right? If we are not monitoring, if we are not maintaining visibility at the level we need to maintain, how can we possibly control it? So what I really wanted to share with you guys today was a couple of examples of visibility in action. Okay, what does this all mean? So one example I have here is Goya Foods. Okay, this is a company that you think, oh, food, cans, etc., beans, actually much, much more than that. If you look at the process they go through to deliver that to us, they actually are running over 100 mission critical applications in their network. And they're having over 10,000 IoT devices, ranging from what the employees use to the automations in their factories. And something as small as a 1-second delay can result in 19-hour hit on efficiency. How do you know when you have a 1 second, a half a second, a 1 millisecond issue in the network in order to prevent that? We worked with Goya in order to give them the visibility they did not have. They were using tools that just could not keep up with the granularity they needed. They needed to be able to look so deep into everything that was going on that they could actually predict when there was going to be a problem. Please, you can just build this one out. One more. I didn't bake the slide. One of the largest financial companies in the world had a challenge, okay? They were heavily dependent on reliability. They are delivering financial transactions, trading, et cetera. And they needed to ensure that their customers were getting what they needed. But they were having issues with degradation. Not outages, but gremlins. The things that show up and you just can't figure out, and when you go look, it's gone. You know, you get a call to IT, IT says, oh, it's not there now, everything must have cleared up by itself. And that was causing them issues because they could not find where their issues were. They wanted to make sure they could get to things faster, and they also were having challenges with their providers. They had no way of confirming the issue was with their network, which is massive, or the issue was with their provider. So we actually instrumented with software and small amount of hardware throughout their network at a 40% of their operational cost that they would have spent otherwise. We did that in order for them to be able to quickly see what was happening. And they actually started doing predictive changes to their network where they would have a performance week. They looked at everything was, and they'd say, let's optimize where we need to optimize. And it really drove down their mean time to repair. Accedian is a very large healthcare conglomerate in the US, and they had actually recently deployed 100 gig. And they were using multiple vendors to provide this solution, and they had truly no way of looking across their network in a way that wasn't apples and oranges equal, you know, fruit salad. They needed something that gave them visibility across everything that they could relate to. And their network team was constantly being bombarded with issues, and they had no way of proving it wasn't them. In their case, it was less about mean time to repair and more about proof of innocence. It was more about being able to go to providers, being able to go to other groups and say, it's not us. Or actually knowing when it was them and then figuring out where to go fix. We gave them a single pane of glass for them to look and take in information from various components in the network and the sensors from us. And it allowed them to significantly reduce their time between trouble ticket to who do we need to go and get this to. Please. So when you look at the common theme throughout all of this, and we think about that data hungry age and consumption, we can't just consume, we can't just provide. Every element that we provide to our customers needs to be understood, controlled, monitored, and viewed, all the way up to the individual user experience that that end customer gets. And if we think we're just providing a pipe, we're just providing one component of that, that one component could be the Achilles heel that brings it all down. So it's important that throughout all elements we see, it's important that we're able to segment and view. And it's very, very important that we are able to look at the level that the networks need to operate. Because if we don't do that and we just generally look at performance, we will miss things. And in the coming data evolution, digitalization that's happening, we will miss that one thing that causes that next big Facebook drop, that causes that next big, hopefully not in the middle of a critical surgery issue. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Remigio. Thank you very much for sharing the insights. Now, one question I have for you. On the network side, or within the networks, where do you see, what's the biggest challenge you're facing, or what you see?
Understanding of where to put capacity.
Yeah.
You tend to, historically, we've tended to do quite a big of a broad brush. I'm projecting a 30% increase. I will do a 30% change. The reality is that and we learned this through the pandemic, everybody's estimations of where consumption was going to happen in a network out the window. So being able to see where your utilization actually is at the various points in the network allows you to proactively go and work on that capacity. But I think that's one of the biggest challenges, is how do you invest strategically in order to provide the services you need.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much for your presentation. So let me get Sophie and Justin and Jim to the discussion. So welcome again, guys. Thank you for joining. Now, talking about the wholesale industry in a data-hungry age and challenges and the opportunities which are out there. Sophie, maybe because you have this helicopter view, as you mentioned in your introduction, you're not just looking and surveying and supporting and advising telco, but tech in general. So I would be really curious, and maybe the people out there as well. Talking about digital transformation, what are we talking about? Let's say in the landscape, in the tech landscape. What do you see there, broader than telco?
Broader than telco. You just used the example of healthcare at large. We were part for one of our clients named Medidata. It's a clinical trial SaaS platform of the Moderna trial. And it was absolutely fascinating because they had to get 34,000 people, over a few months to participate, to be part of this trial. And it was the first ever. It has to be totally remote. Everything was new. They could not have patient in hospital, a doctor. They could not monitor with, your regular nurses or anything. So they had to digitalize this entire process, which has turned into this massive decentralized clinical trial. And, they are looking at it from the patient standpoint. And it's interesting to wear many hats because one of my questions was, what happened to the network? What happened to the servers? How much capacity did you need? Where did you need to connect? They had the data, and the quality mattered far more than the quantity about the patients. What was very hard was how would the connectivity and responding to all this data that was inputted remotely needed to be mapped out. They didn't know what hospital could see patient or not see patient. They didn't know where and how they would actually create a spread and a representation of patient that was required for that trial. So you're talking about predictability. I would push it to one more phase, which is it has to be seamless and ready. You need to be able to go anywhere, deploy anywhere, being able to be live with your customer, with the patient, with the end user, literally on the dot. So you need to think about your network, and a lot of enterprises we've seen through COVID never really thought that they would have to completely change their thinking around connectivity, and that forced it. And I think it's been phenomenal.
Okay, thank you, Justin. Your take on the digital transformation landscape. What do you see?
Through COVID, people have gotten smarter about availability and what they've needed from a transformative stance on capacity. So, I think building off what Sophie and Ramiro have said, it's not just thinking about it and going, where are they going next, but also having it ready, available, and being able to deploy it instantaneously. So I think we're seeing modeling now coming through where nobody's looking at 12, 24-month modeling. They're starting to say, where are we actually going to be in 5 years? How do we build and protect our network for those next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road, and put the infrastructure in place that will grow? Because, I think to Ramiro's earlier point, 27% is probably a low figure. And if that figure truly is low, you need to start putting those plans in place now. It takes a long time to build a fiber route. It takes a long time to deploy equipment across that route. It takes a long time for you to then fill that capacity you just spent all the money on. So certainly, I think people are getting much wiser about it, much more intelligent, and they're using the analytics to build a better network.
Okay, thank you. Now, Jim, over to you. And sorry that you cannot join us live, but good having you. So thank you for joining. So, what's your take on in general on the digital transformation landscape? What do you see around you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would kind of address it in a couple of ways. One is, I remember, I think he's an author for TechCrunch. And he made a really interesting quote that a lot of people know nowadays. And he said, you know, the world's largest taxi company doesn't own a taxi. The world's largest accommodation company doesn't own a hotel, right? So, you know, these digital native, you know, companies that have come around and basically define themselves by digital experience, right? So that's a kind of a little unfair because it's easy on the one hand. The other way I think to look at it is that, you know, if you think about, you know, how does Toyota compete with Ford, or how does Tesla compete with Ford, or, you know, and it really is around digital experience. I mean, look at a Tesla. Tesla has 2.5 times as many silicon chips in that car as any other normal gas-fired vehicle, right? Only part of that is attributable to, you know, it uses electricity, right? Everything else about it has to, I mean, if you've been in a Tesla, you know what it's like, right? It's a very immersive sort of experience. But even more broadly, down to, you know, how every company does business with regard to whether it's using, you know, AI ML to look at how it sells, you know, how its customers behave, you know, people doing analytics on computer vision applications in retail stores, which is a very traditional brick and mortar. The last thing I'd leave you with is, you know, when I joined Equinix 12 years ago, I think 7% of our revenue as a company came from what you would think of as sort of traditional enterprise, non-digital native companies, right? As of this last quarter, I think 35% of all new bookings and 50% of new logo acquisition are all traditional enterprises. And it has everything to do with the fact that they are running en masse to the cloud because they're digitizing everything to do with their back office, right? And so we see it show up essentially in the data center.
Okay, thank you. So, okay, let me stay with you, Jim. So, is digital transformation then impacting, let's say, our carrier business models? And if so, how? Oh, what did you see?
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting to see how it's affected infrastructure, because you also had a very similar dynamic, say the difference between a new fiber provider and an incumbent, right? In the new fiber providers, there was never a question as to where their big network nodes are. They're us, right? They never went out and tried to acquire real estate, build data centers, central offices, any of those things. However, you know, 10, 15, 20, whatever years ago, if you looked at the incumbent, we were always a spoke off of their network, right? They'd build a ring, it only went through their buildings, and you'd hang off of that. Now, I mean, I'm on multiple calls where incumbent operators in their countries who work with us are basically doing, you know, 400 gig overbuilds, and now it's not a question as to where those nodes land, right? It's companies like ourselves and our competitors. So you actually do, you know, see it play out in terms of real life, what people are actually putting in the ground. And similarly with, you know, what's happening with wireless, with 5G, right? Most people don't appreciate the fact that wireless services are consumer services for the most part up until 5G. 99% of all revenue a mobile operator makes is on consumer services. However, 5G enables business services, but that's not actually how the network was set up, right? So there actually has to be an architectural, and this is similar to what I was saying about the incumbent overbuilds. There actually has to be an architectural change. You have to put the breakout function somewhere different, right? And so how companies actually build and operate their networks changes quite a bit. You know, it's not appliances anymore, it's white boxes and VNFs, right? Virtual network functions, right? So everything about the networking business is quite a bit different than it was just 10 years ago.
Okay, thank you, Sophie. Anything to add to that? Well,
yes, one thing, when you actually look at the different areas of growth, one of the biggest is delivery with anything as a service. We're going from like 5 billion to close to 97 billion in the next 10 years. And that needs to be enabled by network and infrastructure and so forth. And it's really interesting because it's not just SaaS and everything as a service, but it's also when you work in other area, and we are talking about AI, ML for our networks, but when you work in other industries and AI, ML is part of their strategies, you sit and you say, what will be the network model that will support that? And I think it's as much of a huge opportunity as it's a really scary scenario, because sometimes it may not. So I think it's really fascinating. I think it's going to create a lot of new model where we need to rethink connectivity. And I think in wholesale, since that was the specific topic of this session, I think a lot of things have changed. Like some company have come where they're starting doing consolidation, and they use, PaaS and infrastructure as a service and SaaS as a way to bring the wholesale business into a different model that can be, far more lucrative and interesting than the traditional model. So yes, I mean, infrastructure is at the core of everything that is being built with technology today. So.
Okay, thank you. Ramiro, how do you see the digital transformation changing, let's say, the business models we're working with today?
Well, I think a lot of what we're doing is going to rely on heavily on automation. So the business model of delivery on the surface may not change, but how we are going to actually instrument the networks to adapt themselves, because we're getting to the point that it's machine speed needs to manage machine speed. So automation of provisioning, automation of capacity changes, automations of rerouting, automation of making sure that, if we talk about 5G, for example, automatic slice creation, slice rerouting, instantiating, taking it up, taking it down. It relies on an interoperability from a vendor perspective that I don't think we've actually had there yet. We've had to interop. There's been standards set up in order for interoperability to work, but most of the time, a lot of companies just skirted those requirements just enough to say we comply. Now we're going to get to the point where it has to actually really talk and work together, because otherwise you will never be able to have an open environment from a multi-vendor perspective and get to the automation you're going to need in order to actually have a true living, breathing network.
Okay, thank you. Justin?
So I think we're seeing it as really a combination of, Jim's world and our world and the fiber space of people actually meshing this together. And it's being driven by now massive influxes of capital. We're seeing it from the banking side, where these massive infrastructure funds are coming in and consolidating companies into multi-tiered attributes where, in one time, you could go to one company and buy your colo space, your fiber, your connectivity. And it's almost feeling like we're headed back there. Everything's split up, and call it after the bust in the early 2000s. And it does feel that these large banking enterprises are starting to move us back and moving us to a different model, because they also are seeing competition from some of their largest customers who are building fiber on their own, building data centers on their own, and starting to think, well, if they have extra, maybe they're going to compete with all of us one day. And it's all possible. So I think everybody is on edge in terms of building net new models based on what both the banking and competitive landscape is going to be, and how we all continue to evolve into that to build next generation networks is, I know, certainly important to us and what we're looking forward to.
Okay, thank you, Justin. Now we mentioned 5G, and so let's go a little bit more into the new technologies. So new technologies, they push us and they have a huge impact on our service portfolio. So how, Jim, and in what way?
Yeah. Well, I can give you one really good example that is something that I experienced here at Equinix, which was, we used to not operate a network that linked our data centers together, right? And the reason we didn't do that was because our biggest customers are networks, right? You didn't want to compete with your customer. But what we kept encouraging people to do was to say, we need you to make capacity instantaneously acceptable between the data centers, right? And nobody would do it. I mean, it just didn't happen. So we did it, right? We built it, right? And so it's all API driven, SDN, pay as you go. There's no term, right? I worked for carriers 15, 20 years ago. The idea of a term less than 12 months would make your finance department have a heart attack, right? And so now it's literally pay by the drink for everything. So everything about the networking experience is starting to change because of a lot of the underlying technology. And what we're finding is that all of the previous assumptions, well, oh, if I don't have a term, I'll have horrible churn, is exactly the opposite. The more convenient you make things, the easier they are to consume, the more likely people are to consume them. So usage goes up. So, we now have a very big business we never even anticipated to have, based off of just simply copying cloud consumption models, right? Which is now very, very prevalent in the networking business. Everything about, like when you mentioned 5G, everything about that experience is, API driven service creation. It's not, sort of, hey, there's a network that sits underneath and everything else sits on top, and the two things are not associated with each other anymore. That's no longer the case, right? There's more and more coupling between the network layers and the application layers every day.
Okay, thank you. Ramiro, you want to jump in?
Well, when we talk about 5G, you start talking about where the edge is ultimately going to be, right? Multi-access edge, mobile edge compute. How are you going to get there? So what you've actually created is, in order to facilitate having these widely distributed new portions of your network, you need connectivity to them. And how do you do that without literally having to physically build every single piece of connectivity to them? And that's where the collaboration is going to be. That's where it's no longer a question of, am I going to compete with my customer? It's a question of, how am I actually going to get this done, and what options do I have on the table to do it? So I think that it brings that new challenge to solve. And in some markets, it's pretty easy to self-fulfill if you have a certain business model in a certain country where you own everything. In other markets where there is more of a disparity of who owns which segment, it's going to bring in that collaboration quite a bit more. And we're seeing that. We're seeing the partnership agreements between the hyperscale providers and the operators, and they're doing that in order to prepare themselves to be able to deliver that.
Okay, thank you. So Justin, you want to add something to it? And maybe, you can talk a little bit about, the building, the new networks, the SDNs, what's needed, what should we look out for?
Yeah, I think right now, in terms of building net new routes and net new fiber builds, it's all about diversity. Building a new route between two of the key markets, whether it's, two of Jim's key markets, and building a net new fiber route between them and connecting, multiple Equinix or digital sites or other facilities for certain clients, certainly is going to drive a lot of that growth. And it's what we're seeing is people asking for the third route between two cities, the fourth route between two cities. And then backing off of that with wireless and how 5G is being deployed, and being able to then look, what are we going to serve wirelessly off of that A and Z lope route? It's not going to be a traditional tower maybe that they're going to put a 5G node in. It could be on the side of this building we're in. And does this building even have that connectivity, or does that building now need to connect wirelessly? And it doesn't have the infrastructure necessarily to be able to do what it needs to do today. So how are we going to partner with these next generation companies to build this new infrastructure that's never been built, creating a whole new class of companies that are going to be out there to help support this growth and evolution? And a lot of that's being done off of traditional routes, but it's going to be even done more so off of these next generation routes.
Jim? It does.
Yeah, I mean, so, I think one of the things that's interesting that I would, I guess, bring up from the network side of this is just because SDN has become popular, just because we can now run VNFs on white boxes, just because all of these things are possible, it still requires money, right? It's not like you can keep your current customer base and change the engine on a moving vehicle, right? It doesn't quite work that way. So, there's a lot of overbuild pressure in place. A lot of what we do now with regard to some of our digital services, like the Fabric, or like our bare metal services, or like our NFVI, is really actually an attempt in helping the operators offset capital charges by being able to consume things in the data center environment on an OpEx basis, right? Because we do understand that, hey, building a brand new 5G network is ridiculously expensive, right? Or, hey, going through the conversion of, traditional circuit switched, manual driven process to everything's automated and, completely SDN driven experience is a very difficult and expensive thing. So, just because we say digital and digital feels easy to the end user, digital's hard, right? Especially if you've been in a business that's been around for such a long time. with a lot of manual process. So, that's to me, one of the more interesting aspects of this is, we're seeing success where like you said, you can partner up, whether it's operators partnering with hyperscalers. AT&T did a deal with Microsoft, right? Or AWS doing a deal with Dish as they build out their network, right? Folks are now running parts of networks that are not networking companies, right? But they're doing it in conjunction with the operators. So that's a huge change.
Thank you. So, Sophie, talking about the operators and the telcos, how can they prepare themselves? So, what are the key elements to watch out for from your point of view? I mean, can you lead the way? Is there what's the path to follow?
Well, first of all, everything that has to do with international wholesale, we see a lot of consolidation. A lot of companies have actually acquired those divisions within the operators and are specializing around how to deliver wholesale traffic across the line. I think whoever will create the most flexible pay-as-you-go OpEx-based model and bring new innovation into it will succeed, because consolidation alone won't do it. The other thing is, when you actually look at the trends, there is such a huge focus on security.
Yeah, we'll get there in a minute.
Yeah, we see, I just read recently 97% of the CIOs in the US have changed their agenda to focus on security strategy next year over digital transformation. That's actually says something. So, for wholesale, it's not just transit traffic capacity. It's how can you offer the most flexible, seamless, secure network across everything, including your partner, your data centers, and that's the biggest challenge, because it is not wholesale as we know it.
Thank you. Ramiro? Yeah, that was a big one.
Yeah, well, because I'm trying not to get, you're waiting for security. So we're not going in there just yet.
No, we're getting there.
But the reality is that the more players, the bigger everything is, the more ingress points into a network, the more egress points from a network, the wider the environment is for potential penetration. Okay, so we have to, to echo Sophie's point, the secure portion of a network at all layers of construction is vital, because we know once they get in, we're in bad shape. How do we keep it from happening at all levels of the provider? So now when you get into correction of what's being provided, but now when you get into the various partnerships, and those business models associated, how do we ensure that you're covering the responsibilities of each to make that happen? And that is something that can't be taken for granted, because we will focus historically on what I'm getting, what I'm providing. And we all need to have that step back of saying, okay, and how are we making sure that this is part of it, and who's responsible for doing what in it? Because the last thing you want to do is be in that scenario that the root cause analysis shows it's because somebody didn't.
Okay, thank you. Justin?
Can you repeat the question again?
Of course. How did the telcos and the
I think it's really going to be optimizing what it is that they're all going for in their business, and talking about, the combinations of different businesses and how everybody is going to scale for the future. I think there's an opportunity to help them really drive this into that next level, whether they're a 5G provider or if they're going to be building fiber like us. There's an opportunity for further collaboration and, talking about the security element. I think there's a lot to be done.
Thank you. So finally, Ramiro, yes, now we get there. We're getting there. Surveillance, security, personal data, privacy, what have you. Ramiro, floor is yours.
Well, effectively, personal privacy, data privacy, network security, network robustness at all levels is required. But one of the biggest things we have to look at is it's getting more and more difficult to keep bad actors out, right? That human vector continues to be there, and as much training as we all take, and I'm sure all of us here have wonderful security training, we are eagerly taking on phishing scams and things of that nature to help try to keep that door closed. It's a porous door. It will happen. How do we address it? Now, addressing it can be the extreme of pulling the plug. You want to look at it from a network perspective, a physical perspective, right? My house is on fire, close the door. But it also has to be, how fast do you actually know someone is there? So the collaboration between being able to see into areas we historically would not have been allowed to see in between shared providers, if you will, allows us to be able to build that intelligence of those little things that are being done. Think of the $1 charge on your credit card that you never pay attention to at the gas station, that's followed by the $1,000 charge at Edwin Watts for golf clubs, right? There are signs, there are things being done. Now, how do we come together as providers of various aspects of a complete digital experience for a consumer to make sure that what we can do with what we're providing is minimizing that time that a bad actor has to do something in order to be able to, the faster we address it. I mean, right now, I believe it's like 260 days is the average time that a breach goes undetected. That's crazy. And they're dripping and drabbing and dripping and drabbing. And by the time you find out, it's just way too late. How do we make that it just happened? How do we bring it to the point that it's near instantaneous? We know something's happening. And then the important part from a networking perspective is take action. How can we actually take action by whether it's a selective small blockage to a complete pull the plug because we're in a casualty situation and to keep it from happening? And how do you actually put in the tools and mechanisms between the various partners and players so that that can happen in a seamless fashion to the end user and in a way that you can then restore quickly? Because one of the other challenges is restorability. Many times the knee-jerk reaction of when there is a security breach into a company is it takes them longer to restore services because they're actually not sure which services they can restore yet. And it's not how long it took them sometimes to actually catch it, get through whatever ransomware portion of it was there, et cetera. But it's then how long does it actually take that company to get back to operating the way they were operating before? And the faster you can have, or the better you're prepared for that eventuality actually happening, the faster you can restore those services and move on with your life.
Okay, thank you, Justin. So how are you and Max actually supporting your customers on security and so on?
We're seeing a lot of companies moving to private networks. And companies that are gearing up for now what's going to be the 5G experience on private networking, but also doing it on fiber and really moving toward an ability to control their own destiny, build their own native applications on top, and put up the walls of the castle, if you will, to really try to keep everything inside the door, not let anybody in, minimize. There's always one person that clicks on the wrong thing, does the wrong thing, or somebody finds the one little small loophole. And there are some amazing software applications that are going to be coming out, I think, to help defeat quantum and what's going to be out there. But the moment you build one thing, somebody's going to build something to help defeat it. You build another, somebody's going to build something else. So I think it's a never-ending game, and there's a lot of businesses making a lot of money on that never-ending game on all sides. So but I think people are taking also a rudimentary approach to it to say, let's go all the way down to the base layer. Let's acquire our own assets. Let's put our own infrastructure in. Let's build it ourselves and try to minimize this as much as possible, and then build those other security elements over top.
Okay, thank you. Now, Jim, I'm coming to you, especially on security and surveillance, because a zillion amount of enterprises and customers are relying actually on your security, your surveillance, and what have you all in there. Yep. And I've been in the data center world, so I think I know a little bit out of there. But help me, how are you helping protect your customers?
Yeah. So probably the lead in your example of, people who've been in a big multi-tenant data center environment. I remember talking to, 20 years ago to people in the financial services business. And the reason they would tell you they weren't a multi-tenant data center company was because they were more secure than we were, which of course, I laughed very hysterically because eventually they all became customers because they realized they couldn't actually run a data, it's just specialization. It's, so that's one aspect obviously of what we do, right? From the outside of the building to where your equipment is, you got to go through, 6 different layers of biometric security, right? So there's lots of things physically that we try to do. And then to the point on private networking, that's actually the reason we created our Fabric capability, was to basically aggregate private network connectivity, so MPLS, Ethernet, what have you, to public cloud resources. Because for that very reason, hey, if it goes over the internet, it will get hacked, period. End of story. There is no perfect defense. It's going to happen. So one way is just to take yourself out of the game, right? and solve it that way. And so doing that on an automated basis between, the work we do with the operators and the hyperscalers to make it kind of seamless is another area we spend a lot of time on. And then the final side is, the internet, of course, is a fact of life. It's, a part of how we all do business, and it's not going anywhere. And so therefore it will always be a security problem. And so we spend a lot of time with now, you have this whole new set of, born in sort of cloud native architectures of security companies, whether it's Zscaler or any other, where, essentially the entire world is zero trust, right? All of my traffic gets scrubbed through something. And most of those companies are our customers, right? We work very carefully with them. Like we work with almost every DDoS provider as an example, so that when they clean traffic after an attack, they can hand it off using our Fabric product to the private side of the enterprise network. And so they don't have to worry about sort of a double attack, because normally DDoS is a double hop over the internet. So there's architecturally many things you can do in the network to actually just reduce your surface exposure. Or when you are out there, partner with the right set of companies to make sure that you're doing everything you can, because, inevitably it will happen. I guess the final thing I would say that I see enterprises doing that makes a ton of sense is they do assume they will be hacked now. And so, we have way more sites on our networks where they're all intended to back each other up. The customer expects to be offline at some point for some reason. And so what they do is they build so they recover very, very quickly, right? Whether that's just, rebuild from scratch, but, you have to basically duplicate infrastructure to do that.
Okay, so what you're saying is the awareness at the enterprise level is now there. On the board level. That also means that the budgets are there, right?
Oh yeah, no, yeah, that is probably one of the more, to me, the biggest reason we've had such a, when I made a short thing about, digital transformation, is a lot of the security and the certainty aspects of, buildings that are hardened for this purpose, where, the handoffs are private on purpose, so that there is no chance of somebody getting in the middle of it. So it's a huge, one of our selling personas is the CISO, right? The Chief Information Security Officer in a company.
Yeah, no, exactly. So, we are pushed by the demand, right? So, ladies and gentlemen, we're coming a little bit to the end of this this session. And now maybe just, if I may start with you, scoping a bit the future. What are the latest developments that we can expect from your point of view? And maybe what is your crystal ball? What are you predicting?
I think it's really the continued development and growth of the industry, both from a combinating factor, like we talked about earlier with the banks and consolidation, but also, in fact, what's going to be exciting with a lot of these net new designs that are coming out, both from a subsea perspective, like we've talked about already at this conference, and from a landing station perspective, and from a backhaul perspective. Domestically here in the United States, a lot of this infrastructure hasn't been designed or redesigned in decades, and this has been a great opportunity to help do that. And COVID has definitely, I think, pushed along those plans. So I think we're going to continue to see that evolution, growth, and acceleration over the next 24 months of new projects, new plans, new routes, new facilities, and that's going to be really exciting from our perspective.
Okay, thank you. It's not only in the US that they're a bit behind. Let's talk about Europe. I mean, one of the biggest, most Western countries called Germany, they now are aware that they are 20 years behind. So a huge amount of money is pushed in there now, and so it's moving ahead. Sophie, your last famous takeaway words, maybe. What should we look out for?
I think it's famous. It's really interesting to listen to everybody and Jim and security. Someone said recently that the next big trend will be verticalization. And everybody goes like, no, we're in cloud, we're here. Everything we hear from the enterprise customer and the way they use AI, ML, the way they are building their plan for infrastructure and other is so very specific to the market. And I do believe that verticalization is going to drive a lot of the changes. Someone yesterday couldn't remember the great resignation, but what we're seeing is there is this massive, explosive kind of option that this is a new scenario where people are trying to figure out how to get connected, how to come all together. We're doing an AI conference and everybody is talking about one solution at a time: data center power management, sustainability, network security. And we're like, whoa, when do those things come together? And how do you design them together for very specific industry? And I think, maybe in a couple of years, that will be the shift. A fintech solution, a biotech solution, a clinical trial solution from a connectivity standpoint. And I think anyone who brings connectivity, cloud security together will win. So looking forward to see that as well.
Okay. Ramiro, before I come to you for the last closing words, Jim, over to you. Your crystal ball, man.
Yeah, no, I think, come down on Justin's side a bit, because, my joke about Equinix is we're evidence that physics matter, right? And so a lot of what's happening with the development of the edge and what needs to happen to deliver things like business class, low latency services and whatnot. Like I said, the networks were not set up to do that, right? And they currently don't exist in a formation that makes that easy to do. It's possible, but it's not easy to do. So, we are in the early innings of people changing radios and software, but they haven't actually changed the physical back-end infrastructure yet. And that's about to happen, right? People are getting to the point where that's the next place to unlock value. So there's going to be a huge amount of work, not just in terms of how the network is put together, but whether it's the fiber overbuilders, everybody else. Lots more money going into this space is my prediction.
That's good to hear. Now, Ramiro.
I not sure exactly who said this eons ago, but the only constant is change. Consolidation and collaboration. Sophie's point is so true. If we continue to think as individual solution components of an overall delivery to a consumer, we will continue to miss the opportunity to actually find where we can actually truly maximize synergies. So I think that we don't even really fathom just how much our industry is going to change. When you start talking about 6G, for example, which is a big security focused and AI focused upcoming technology, are we actually going to have a 5G that's this with 6G quickly on it because we're going to discover there's some things we need quicker? I think we are going to discover more, and we're going to discover it exponentially. But we have to, collaboration has to be an emphasis for all. And one of the things that tends to happen is we tend to leave those things that are nice, or we believe are niceties, to the end. And we actually have to build our networks with the end customer in mind of what ultimately do we expect them to put on it, so we can prepare for it. Justin's point about looking 5, 10 plus years up is spot on. And I think that's what we're going to have to do as an industry. And if we don't, then, the winners will be the ones that do, to your point.
And the winners I will have in a couple of years again on the panel, right? And I hope it will be all you guys. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We were talking about the wholesale industry in a data-hungry age, the challenges and the opportunities. So, Jim, thank you so much, man, for joining us, even virtually. But you know what? I keep you to your promise. Huh? Next time you'll be here, right?
And next time I will be there.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sophie. Thank you for giving us as well a little bit, let's say, on the strategy side and helicopter view, what's going on in tech as a whole and not only telco. So thank you very much for your insights. Justin, fantastic having you. Thank you so much. And Ramiro and Accedian, thank you so much for, first of all, sharing your keynote presentation and sponsoring this panel session. With those words, audience, thank you so much for staying with us and being with us. And for out there, everybody, ciao for now and see you soon. And greetings here from the GCC and Miami Live, brought to you by Carry Community. Bye-bye.
Thank you.